In this video, we're going to be talking about dopamine and how it plays a role in addiction. Stay tuned. Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to another episode here at Sobriety University. On this channel, we talk about addiction and recovery related topics. And in this video, we're going to be talking about dopamine and how it plays a role in addiction, and in turn, quitting addiction or possibly preventing relapse from understanding what dopamine does and the role it plays. So I think it's really important to understand dopamine. It's been very helpful in quitting addictions and kind of recognizing that maybe I'm in a dopamine deprived state and that's why I'm craving a certain substance more than other times. And other times that when the dopamine is high, I really don't think about it. So kind of understanding that correlation has been super helpful in staying away from addiction. So let's just dive right in. So what is dopamine? Dopamine is a neurotransmitter and a hormone, and it regulates movement, memory, and the pleasure and reward seeking part of the brain. So as many of you guys can probably already tell, that's pretty common, and a big theme within addiction and people with addiction is that reward seeking kind of need and behavior. So before we dive any further, I just want to put out a disclaimer that I'm not a neuroscientist. I haven't studied dopamine under a microscope. I'm just going off what I've experienced and how I've learned to understand it over these 6 years in recovery. And maybe some of this can translate to you, and a lot of information can be found on the internet. So YouTube, Google, thousands of definitions of dopamine. So just gonna report here what I've learned involving addiction. And so with dopamine anyway, I noticed that whenever I do or did an addictive activity, I could almost feel my brain lighting up. So the challenge I have for you today is next time you do something that's addictive, and or that you know is addictive, or if you're struggling with relapse or whatever stage you are on the journey, the invitation is to kind of take note on how your mood elevates when you are anticipating the substance, when you actually take it, and then notice how that energy kind of lowers after the substance is worn off, or maybe right away, depending on how strong the addiction is. And how quickly that's replaced with like guilt and shame. No, I'm just kidding. For real though, like what I've noticed is that when I were to do an addictive substance or behavior, I get that shot. It's almost like, literally like I'm taking a drug. I get that rush of energy, that rush of feel-good chemicals, and I'm like, wow, like pupils dilate. For example, I'm kind of working on an addiction to YouTube, watching movies, and that kind of thing. I've been working on it for probably a couple years now, and so it's definitely been one that has taken a long time to get a hold of, and I'm finally starting to come out on the other side of it, where I can go a week at a time plus without using. And when I do use, I can recognize that I'm slipping back into the addictive behavior, and then the binge only lasts for like a day or so instead of like 3 days, 4 days, a week, which is what it used to do. So I noticed that as soon as I look at that screen, as soon as I just like focus in and just let everything like just drop away, I just notice like it's just this elation. It's just this rush of good feelings that comes up, usually from like the back of my brain stem, or the spinal cord. That's where it feels like anyway, and it's like whoosh. And I just like, I can tell my pupils dilate, and I get like super just like relaxed. All these feel-good chemicals come through my body, the serotonin, norepinephrine, all of those chemicals that induce relaxation. And I think that's why these chemicals can be so addicting, is because it gives us that relief. And how does this play into an addiction or a substance? Well, I think part of it, it's two things here. Part of it is the substance itself and the stuff that's within the whatever the addiction is, whatever the substance is. And then the second part is more the habitual pattern and anticipation and kind of behaviors that go along with doing the addiction. So that can cause relief as well. I know when I used to smoke weed, I would get a lot of excitement and relaxation just packing the bowl or getting out the lighter, grinding up the weed, what have you. I remember I would get excited, or when I would choose to drink, when I used to go to the liquor store, that was a behavior that I would get kind of pumped about, and I would start feeling really good. And of course, after I drank and all that, the depression would hit and all those chemicals would just drop. So how do these chemicals, like how does dopamine play a role with addiction, and maybe why does one want to use more and more if they're already getting dopamine from the substance. Well, the substance doesn't last forever. The high doesn't last forever, and the brain doesn't have an endless supply of dopamine, at least at a high level. So what happens is that, let's say I do this activity, do the behavior, push play on the TV, or take that rip of the weed, start taking some shots. What happens is I get all that rush of excitement from the activity, from the event, from the situation, from the substance itself, like changing stuff in the brain. Weed in particular, I got that a lot. And so I get that rush, I feel that excitement, and then like anything, it has to kind of settle down again. What happens though is that since so much of the dopamine was used in that initial blast of the behavior or the substance, like that initial using, drink, shot, whatever, literally it could be like an injection. Since so much of the dopamine gets used up, that the body then has to fight again to get that much dopamine, or at least what it thinks is like an equivalent amount. And of course, there's not much left. So basically, we're just running on reserves here. Like, let's say with gas anyway, we got 30 miles left in the tank, and eventually it's going to start running on the reserves. And that's kind of what's happening with the addiction and with dopamine. It starts to use those reserves of dopamine left. And then so what's left is like no dopamine because it's been used up in trying to get high, from getting high in the first place, and then from trying to get more high and keeping the high going. And then obviously there's a crash. And I think I would be shocked if somebody told me that they didn't go through a crash after a night of partying. That's the hangover, for example, the feeling of hate life, blah, 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 all that negativity that comes from a withdrawal. And so what happened when I was using copiously, so lots of marijuana, lots of partying, I was constantly needing to re-up on that dopamine because I had none left because I depleted it so much from partying so much. So what happened was I didn't realize that dopamine could be restored by just not using. There's that phrase of a tea break, which is taking a little break. And essentially what that's doing is restoring the natural levels of neurochemicals, neurotransmitters in the brain again and in the body. And so because I was using so much and because I wasn't really aware of that, I kept going to the drugs and the substances and the food and the porn and all that stuff to try to get that high again, to try to feel normal again, because I was already naturally so low on dopamine because I used it up from weeks and weeks of nonstop using and partying. And what I found was that over time, it became progressively harder and harder and harder to feel good, to feel happy, to feel joy without any substance in my body or using a substance or behaving in an addictive behavior. And when I wasn't using anything, I felt just miserable and depressed. And that was because I had no dopamine left. I had no feel-good chemicals to regulate those feel-good emotions in the body. I had none of that left. And I think that's why a lot of folks have a hard time quitting, is because of that stage of rebalancing when there's just no happiness in the body. It's just pure depression. I'll say I have someone I know is going through this right now. I'm not going to say their name. And they're in that stage right now where, since they've used so much, their brain is going through a rewiring process. Their brain's going through a re-uptake of those neurochemicals. And because of that, they're having some issues like with sleep. They're having some issues with, which is mood and anxiety and stuff. All that is coming up because the brain just is not refueled yet on those neurotransmitters that are necessary for healthy emotional well-being and longevity. And so I think that what's important about this is that in understanding this, what I just talked about here, when that relapse period, when that withdrawal period comes, knowing this, it can be like, okay, this is what's happening right now. I'm going through this basically rebalancing of chemicals in the brain. I thought that I was like losing my mind. My life was I was dying. Because that's how I felt the first time I quit. Because I wasn't aware of this and what was actually happening on just a biological level. And so, having quit a lot of addictions now, I find that I have a natural, just steady supply of dopamine. And in fact, that since it's so steady and readily available and just even keel and it doesn't go through these huge ups and downs, that when I do use a substance like the YouTube or watching TV, that it's such a high that the crash is just so apparent. Like after I binge on movies and stuff, it takes like 2 to 3 days to feel like okay again, to be able to have conversations with people and not want to just like jump out of my skin or just run. And so that's obviously a great motivator and to quit this addiction, because I'm seeing the consequences of using, and it's like nothing that I can really change. Like it's not like I can just start taking shots of dopamine. That doesn't work. I tried antidepressants in the past, which is supposed to help with the reuptake of those neurotransmitters, which basically just means recycling them so they can be used again and at a higher level. Eventually that wore off too. Like I tried like 13 different medications. Fluoxetine, which is Prozac, was the one that worked the most. And that, even after a while, after a few months, I started to feel emotionally numb because that wasn't even doing the job anymore. I realized that I really had to just go raw here and just live at what the body wants for its dopamine levels. And what I find is I'm way happier because I don't have these huge spikes anymore. I'm just kind of in tune with the rhythms of my body, etc. Could go on hours of conversation on that. I just feel like I'm more in touch now, and then I'm not as dependent on these external things to get those natural highs that come from just having dopamine in the brain because I haven't used it all up. So I think with that, we're going to end today. I know there's a ton more we could talk about with dopamine. Feel free to comment down below what your knowledge of dopamine is, if I missed anything, if I said something incorrectly, because again, I haven't studied this like in depth. I've just kind of gone off what my experience is and a few definitions on Google and some stuff on YouTube and stuff. However, I do think it's very important and it plays a huge role in addiction. And just knowing the little bit that I know, it's really helped with quitting addictions and staying off them for the long term. So with that, guys, again, invitation today is to be aware of the next time you do an addictive activity and just see how your mood elevates and fluctuates and all that, and just the high you get, and recognize that that is like the dopamine getting spiked and then getting reduced. So with that, guys, have a great day. Looking forward to the next one, and talk to you soon. Peace.